have held this truth in silence for too long. For 25 years, I've held this secret.
The Vatican called me in, closed the door, and told me never to speak of what I saw. I had been a priest for 30 years, a scientist for 40. I had spent my entire adult life inside an institution that taught me above all else that truth was sacred, that the pursuit of knowledge was an act of worship. And in that room, on that afternoon, two men I deeply respected asked me to choose silence over truth. I have thought about that moment every single day since. Because what I saw in the sky that night above Castel Gandolfo did not fit into any category I had been given, not scientific, not theological, not any framework built by human hands. And tonight, I am going to tell you everything. I am going to give you two truths, both documented, both defended by serious scholars. Both will make you uncomfortable in entirely different ways. Before I go any further, I need to know where you stand. Do you believe what moves in our skies has a spiritual explanation or a scientific one? Drop A or B in the comments right now, because your answer is going to change how you hear everything that comes next. The first truth says what appeared in our skies is ancient, spiritual, and has been described in Scripture for 2,000 years. The second truth says the universe God created may be so incomprehensibly vast that we were never meant to be alone in it. By the end of this, you will have to choose a side. My name is Father Corrado Balducci. I served the Vatican for over 4 decades as a theologian and demonologist, a man whose entire professional life was devoted to understanding the boundary between the natural and the supernatural. I was not always the man who asked difficult questions. As a young priest, I looked up at the night sky the way most seminary students did, with reverence, with certainty, with the comfortable assumption that God had made one world, placed one people upon it, and written one story. The Vatican Observatory sits on the slopes of Castel Gandolfo, southeast of Rome, where the Pope has kept his summer residence for centuries. It is one of the oldest astronomical research institutions in the world, founded in 1891 by Pope Leo XIII, built not to spite faith, but because of it. To study the heavens was to study the mind of God. For decades, I studied, I cataloged, I measured. I believed that science and scripture moved in parallel lines, close, but never colliding. Then the reports began arriving. Not from fringe publications, not from sensationalists, from pilots, from military officers, from astronomers at respected institutions who filed their observations quietly, professionally, and then waited in silence for someone with authority to respond. I responded. What I found did not fit neatly into either of my two worlds. The objects moved at velocities our physics cannot explain. They demonstrated awareness turning, accelerating, vanishing in ways no known propulsion system can replicate. And the encounters left witnesses not merely confused, but changed. Spiritually unsettled in ways they struggled to articulate. I brought these findings to colleagues I trusted. Some listened carefully and said nothing. Others reached immediately for scripture. And what they found there in the oldest texts of our tradition was not comfort. It was recognition. Tonight, I will walk you through both paths, the one that leads to the darkest corners of spiritual warfare, and the one that opens onto a universe so magnificent it expands rather than threatens everything we believe about God. I have looked down both quarters, and I can tell you neither one is easy. Let me tell you what the theologians inside these walls began to whisper and why it frightened them far more than any star chart ever could. The question was not new. Long before radar, long before jet aircraft, long before the United States government formally acknowledged unidentified aerial phenomenon encounters in 2020 and 2022, the Church had already grappled with the possibility of beings that exist between humanity and God. Not extraterrestrials. Not visitors from distant galaxies. Something far older, far closer, and far more dangerous. The book of Genesis records them with careful, unsettling brevity. The Nephilim, beings described as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. Entities that walked this earth before the flood. Entities that Scripture does not fully explain and does not fully dismiss. The early church fathers did not ignore this passage. They wrestled with it. Tertullian wrote about fallen angels who descended and corrupted human civilization. Augustine debated their nature. Aquinas himself acknowledged the theological possibility of non-human intelligences operating within our physical world. What struck several of my colleagues at the observatory was not the strangeness of these accounts. It was how precisely they matched the behavioral patterns documented in modern unidentified aerial phenomenon encounters. Beings of light. Beings that communicate without language. Beings that distort time and space around them. Beings that lead witnesses in states of profound psychological and spiritual disruption. The military calls it cognitive effects. The mystics of the medieval church called it something else entirely. And here is what no mainstream unidentified aerial phenomenon researcher will tell you, because most of them are not theologians. The demonic, in traditional Catholic theology, does not arrive breathing fire and carrying a pitchfork. It arrives as light, as wonder, as an experience so overwhelming that the witness abandons every prior framework for understanding reality, including their faith. I spoke with a former Navy pilot who described his unidentified aerial phenomenon encounter in these words: "It felt like being seen. Not observed, seen. Like whatever was inside that craft knew everything about me." I have heard that description before. Not in a military debrief. In a confession booth. The parallels were not coincidental to me. They were not coincidental to the theologians I'd consulted. And they were not coincidental to the scholars who had spent decades studying what the Church calls diabolical deception, the capacity of non-human intelligences to present themselves as benevolent, as enlightened, as the answer to humanity's deepest longing for contact with something beyond itself. Father Malachi Martin, who served as a professor at the Pontifical Biblical Institute, argued in his later writings that the modern UFO phenomenon bore disturbing structural similarities to historical accounts of demonic manifestation, not in appearance, but in effect, in what it does to the human soul. I could not dismiss that argument, and neither, quietly, could several of my colleagues. There is a pattern that emerges when you study the historical record carefully enough. And I do not mean the unidentified aerial phenomenon sighting reports. I mean something older. Something that predates the modern era entirely and stretches back through every civilization that ever looked at the sky and felt watched. The ancient Sumerians described beings they called the Anunnaki, entities that descended from the heavens, interacted with humanity, and departed. The Egyptians recorded sky phenomena in ancient papyrus documents. The prophet Ezekiel described, in extraordinary, technical detail, a vision of wheels within wheels of living creatures with four faces, moving through fire and light. A passage that aerospace engineer Joseph Blumerish attempted to reconstruct as a spacecraft in his 1974 book. I am not saying these accounts prove extraterrestrial visitation. I am saying they prove something. They prove that humanity has been encountering non-human intelligences or the perception of non-human intelligences for as long as we have kept written records. And across every culture, across every century, the encounter follows the same psychological arc. First overwhelming awe, then a message, always a message, about humanity's potential, about hidden knowledge, about the inadequacy of existing religious frameworks, and finally a slow, irreversible transformation in the witness, a pulling away from community, from tradition, from the anchors of ordinary human life. I began to see this pattern not as evidence of benevolent cosmic visitors. I began to see it as a signature, a methodology, the theology of spiritual deception as articulated by the Desert Fathers, by John of the Cross, by the Jesuit tradition of discernment of spirits describes exactly this sequence. An encounter that begins in light and wonder. A communication that flatters human pride. A transformation that isolates rather than integrates. Diabolus, in the original Latin, does not mean the evil one. It means the one who throws across, the one who disrupts, who divides, who separates. And what has the modern UFO phenomenon done, at a cultural level, if not precisely that? It has divided science from religion. It has divided governments from citizens. It has divided witnesses from their own sense of reality. I am not a man given to conspiracy. I am a scientist. I require evidence. But I am also a priest. And I know that the absence of a natural explanation is not automatically evidence of a supernatural one, and yet, when the supernatural explanation fits with a precision that no other framework can match, intellectual honesty demands that we consider it. My colleague, a theologian whose name I will not share, because he still serves inside these walls, put it to me this way, late one evening in the Observatory library: Corrado, the most dangerous lie is the one that contains 90% truth. I have not forgotten those words. But wait. There is a document dated 1586 locked inside the Vatican Secret Archives for 400 years. Not written by a scientist. Not written by a skeptic. Written by a pope who had already seen something in the sky and didn't know what to call it. And what it contains will change the framework of everything I just told you. Everything I just told you is true. The theological case is real. The historical parallels are documented. The scholars are credible. But so is this. In 2008, the Vatican's chief astronomer Father José Gabriel Funes gave an interview to the Vatican's own newspaper, L'Osservatore Romano, that sent shockwaves through both the scientific and religious communities. The headline read, "The extraterrestrial is my brother." Father Funes did not speak as a French theorist. He did not speak as a man who had abandoned his faith. He spoke as the director of the Vatican Observatory, as a Jesuit, as a scientist who had spent his career at the precise intersection of astronomy and theology. And what he said was this: that the existence of other intelligent life in the universe would not contradict Catholic doctrine. That just as God created the diversity of species on this earth, God could have created rational beings elsewhere. That to deny this possibility was not faithfulness. It was a failure of imagination before the immensity of God's creative power. I read that interview 3 times, and each time, something shifted inside me. Because Father Funes was not the first. Before him, there was Father Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit paleontologist and theologian who spent his life arguing that evolution and faith were not enemies but partners in a single, unfolding cosmic story. Teilhard envisioned the universe as a vast process of becoming matter becoming life, life becoming consciousness, consciousness converging toward what he called the omega point, a moment of ultimate unity toward which all creation was moving. If that vision is truth, the universe is not a static backdrop for human drama but a living, expanding story authored by God, then why would humanity be its only conscious character? The mathematics alone suggest otherwise. Our galaxy contains an estimated 200 to 400 billion stars. The observable universe contains somewhere between 200 billion and 2 trillion galaxies. The James Webb Space Telescope has already revealed galaxies forming within the first few 100 million years after the Big Bang, structures of breathtaking complexity, stretching back to the very edge of observable time. To look at those numbers and conclude that God's creativity extended to precisely one inhabited planet, on one unremarkable star, in one average galaxy requires a confidence in human centrality that the history of science has repeatedly, and humblingly, dismantled. Copernicus removed us from the center of the solar system. Darwin removed us from a separate act of creation. Hubble removed us from the center of the universe. At each step, the Church resisted. At each step, the Church eventually acknowledged the evidence. At each step, faith not only survived, it deepened. I began to wonder whether we were standing at the threshold of a fourth such moment. Not a threat to faith, an expansion of it. The Catechism of the Catholic Church does not address extraterrestrial life directly. But the tradition of theological reflection from Augustine's insistence that we must follow truth wherever it leads, to Aquinas's argument that God's power cannot be limited by human expectation creates ample room for a universe far more populated than our assumptions have allowed. And the unidentified aerial phenomenon encounters the same encounters I had been studying through the lens of spiritual warfare began to look different when I held them against this framework. Not deception, perhaps disclosure. Not fallen angels descending to corrupt. Perhaps created intelligences as real and as beloved by God as we are finally making themselves known to a civilization that had finally developed the instruments to detect them. I did not abandon the first framework, but I could no longer pretend the second one did not exist. Let me tell you about the night I almost made up my mind. I was alone in the observatory. Late. The kind of late where the building stops being an institution and becomes simply a place where a man sits with his thoughts in the sky. I had been reviewing transcripts of unidentified aerial phenomenon encounters, dozens of them, collected over years, looking for the thread that would tell me which framework was correct. And I noticed something I had not noticed before. The encounters that produced the deepest spiritual disruption, the ones that most resembled the theological profile of demonic deception, were almost exclusively encounters involving direct contact. Beings that communicated. Beings that touched. Beings that entered the psychological interior of the witness and rearranged it. But the encounters that produced something different, something that witnesses describe not as violation but as expansion, were almost always distant. A light in the sky. A craft observed from miles away. A presence felt but not engaged. The difference between those two categories of experience began to remind me of something from the tradition of Christian mysticism. The distinction between consolation and desolation. In Ignatian spirituality, the tradition of discernment developed by Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuit order, consolation is the movement of the soul toward God. It brings peace, integration, an expansion of love and understanding. Desolation is the opposite: confusion, isolation, the dissolution of coherent selfhood. The mystics taught that both could arrive wearing the same initial appearance. The difference was in the fruit. What did the encounter produce in the long term? Did it draw the witness toward love, toward community, toward a deeper engagement with life? Or did it isolate, obsess, consume? When I applied that discernment framework to the unidentified aerial phenomenon encounter literature, I found that the data divided almost exactly as the theology predicted it would. Some encounters bore the fruit of desolation. Others bore the fruit of something harder to dismiss. Astronaut Edgar Mitchell, the sixth human being to walk on the moon, described his return from the lunar surface as a moment of overwhelming cosmic consciousness. A sense of universal connectedness so profound that he spent the rest of his life investigating its implications. He did not describe this as an unidentified aerial phenomenon encounter, but he described it in language that every mystic in the Christian tradition would have immediately recognized. Philosopher and researcher Jacques Vallée spent decades arguing that the unidentified aerial phenomenon was not extraterrestrial in the conventional sense but interdimensional, operating not from a distant planet but from a layer of reality, adjacent to our own. A hypothesis that, I noted with considerable interest, maps remarkably well onto the traditional Catholic understanding of the angelic realm, beings that exist outside ordinary space and time, capable of manifesting within it. Whether those beings are fallen or unfallen, whether their intent is corruption or communion. That, Father Funes told me once, is precisely the question that serious theology must now engage. In 1998, a private memo circulated among senior Vatican astronomers. I was one of 3 people who read it. Its final line has stayed with me for 25 years. And tonight, for the first time, I am going to tell you what it said. I spent 20 years trying to choose between these 2 frameworks. And then 3 months before I retired, I found something that made me realize I had been asking the wrong question entirely. The question was never, are they demons or are they aliens? The question, the one that kept me awake that final night at the observatory, was this: what if the answer is the same? What if the beings described in Genesis 6, the sons of God who walked among humanity, and the intelligences Father Funes spoke of when he said the extraterrestrial is my brother, what if they are not 2 separate categories? What if the ancient writers who described angels, and the modern pilots who describe unidentified aerial phenomenons, are reaching from opposite ends of history toward the same reality? A reality that is neither purely physical nor purely spiritual. A reality that our current frameworks, both scientific and theological, are not yet large enough to contain. That was the final line of the 1998 memo. We cannot rule out that we are not alone. And if we are not, then everything we know about the love of God becomes larger, not smaller. Now let me tell you what the record actually shows. What Scripture actually records. What the honest history of this institution actually contains. The Vatican Observatory is real. Its engagement with the unidentified aerial phenomenon question is documented. Father Funes's 2008 statement was never retracted. The theological tradition of demonic deception is real, rooted in Scripture, developed by serious scholars across 20 centuries, impossible to dismiss without intellectual dishonesty. Both frameworks exist. Both have defenders of formidable intelligence and genuine faith. In the Gospel of John, Jesus tells his disciples, "In my Father's house are many rooms." Theologians have debated the meaning of that phrase for 2 millennia. Most read it as a metaphor for heavenly dwelling. But some, a minority, but a serious one, have asked whether the cosmos itself might be one of those rooms. Whether the mansion of God's creation is vaster than any single tradition has yet mapped. At the same time, the letters of Paul warn repeatedly about the powers and principalities, non-human intelligences that inhabit the spiritual dimensions of reality and operate with purposes not always aligned with human flourishing. The tradition of spiritual discernment exists precisely because the Church has always known that not every luminous presence is a benevolent one. These 2 truths do not cancel each other. They coexist. And the honest answer, the answer I arrived at after 40 years at this telescope, in this institution, inside this faith, is that we do not yet know which framework applies to what we are seeing in our skies. We know the phenomena are real. The United States government formally acknowledged in 2020 and 2022 what pilots and scientists had reported for decades. The objects are there. They move in ways our physics cannot explain. They have been observed by multiple independent witnesses using multiple independent sensor systems. What they are, that remains the most important unanswered question of our time. And I genuinely believe, that the answer matters spiritually, not just scientifically. Because if they are what the theologians of spiritual warfare say they are, then what is required of us is exactly what the tradition has always demanded: discernment, prayer, rootedness in community and scripture, and a fierce refusal to surrender our sense of self to any experience, however overwhelming, that isolates rather than integrates. And if they are what Father Funes and Teilhard and the astronomers of expanding faith say they are, then what is required of us is equally clear: an expansion of theological imagination generous enough to accommodate a God whose creative love may extend to beings we have never met, on worlds we have never seen, in corners of a universe so vast that our most powerful telescopes have only scratched its surface. Either way, the response is the same: deeper faith, not shallower; more love, not less. I do not know what moved across my instruments that night at the observatory. I know that it moved me. And I know that 40 years of standing between the stars and the scriptures has taught me one thing above all others: the universe is not indifferent. Something made it. Something sustains it. And whatever else is in it, whatever intelligence, whatever presence, whatever mystery crosses our radar screens and defies our equations, it exists inside a story whose author has not finished writing. 2,000 years of scholars have debated this. Cardinals and cosmologists, mystics and mathematicians, and not one of them has closed the question. If you believe someone you love needs to hear this today, share this video right now. That's your blessing to give them. Everything you heard today draws from the following: the Vatican Observatory's public record and Father José Gabriel Funes' 2008 interview in L'Osservatore Romano, the theological writings of Father Malachi Martin and the Jesuit tradition of discernment of spirits, Genesis chapter 6 and Ephesians chapter 6 from the King James Bible, the cosmological theology of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the unidentified aerial phenomenon research of Jacques Vallée, United States Department of Defense unidentified aerial phenomenon disclosure records from 2020 and 2022, and the Gospel of John, chapter 14. Full source links are in the description below. Now you know what I know. You have heard the first path, the one that leads through the oldest warnings of our tradition, through scripture and the desert fathers and 20 centuries of hard-won discernment, to the conclusion that what moves in our skies may be older than humanity and darker than we want to believe. And you have heard the second path, the one that leads through the mathematics of an incomprehensible universe, through the statements of Vatican astronomers and Jesuit theologians and moon-walking astronauts, to the conclusion that God's creation may be populated with wonders we have not yet had the courage or the instruments to fully face. I have walked both paths. I have prayed at the end of both of them. And I will tell you what I found. Both paths end in the same place. On your knees. In the dark. Looking up. asking the same question humanity has always asked when it encounters something larger than itself: are you there? And if you are, what do you want from me? That question is not a crisis of faith. That question is faith. The willingness to remain in the uncertainty, to refuse the easy answer, to keep the telescope pointed at the dark and keep the prayer pointed at the line even when you cannot tell, in any given moment, which direction is which. So tell me, after everything you have heard tonight, Team A or Team B, do you believe what moves in our skies is the ancient enemy wearing a new face for a new century? Or do you believe it is the first glimpse of a creation so much larger than our maps, a universe so full of God's fingerprints that we simply haven't learned yet how to read them? Drop your answer below and tell me why. Because 2,000 years of history of faith, of science, of every human being who ever looked up and felt something look back deserves more than silence. Next time we go deeper, there is one encounter, documented inside Vatican archives, that neither side of this debate has been able to explain. And when I show it to you, you will understand why this conversation has only just begun. If you believe truth deserves to be heard, you know what to do. The universe is vast. The question is ancient. And somewhere between the stars and the scriptures, the answer is waiting.